Today in this video, I'm going to show you how to make a graph in LoggerPro that has two lines on it. So the data I'm going to use is from our Physics 8 lab on the force of friction, where we looked at the effect of normal force on the force of friction on two different surfaces. One of them was a tabletop and one of them was a ridged plastic surface. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here to this area. This is basically a data table, and I'm going to pull this over a little bit so that I have room to put a second data set. You'll see it says data set here. What I'm going to do is come up here to data and then drag down to choose new data set, and you can see that a new data set has appeared. So for me, one of these data sets, when I double click on it, I can put in a new name, and this one I'm going to call tabletop. That'll be one of the surfaces. And then my other, double click on it, and I'm going to say ridged plastic, and that will be my other surface. So before we get too far, I'm going to put in our data. Oh, let's go ahead and label our columns here actually. So I'm going to double click on my X right there, and my independent variable is going to be my force normal. So I'm going to say force normal here, and if I want to make a short name, I can say FN, and of course my units on my forces are going to be newtons. And so that's my title for my first column, and my other x-axis is actually going to be just the same. So I can double click there, and I can say force normal and give it a short name of FN, and my units are going to be newtons. And now let's do our y-axis. So that is going to be my force friction, and we'll call that FF. And of course, newtons are our units. And then we'll do the same thing for our other one here. Force friction, short name FF, and our units are newtons. So now I'm going to head and just move that over a little bit. And I'm going to start to type in my data here. So for my tabletop, I have to put in my data pairs. It's going to take me a moment. So in the video, in just a moment, I will go ahead and speed that up. So that's my data for my first line. And you can see over here that as I plotted that data actually appeared on my graph. Now, sometimes your x-axis here is going to be identical to your first set of data, or you might have different, in my case, different normal force values for your second set of data. Turns out mine are actually the same. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those values and paste them in there. And if they were different, you would just type them in as I did for the first column. And so now I'm going to type in my values for my normal force for my plastic. So now I've typed in all of the data. And when I look at my graph, however, I'm actually going to scoot that edge over a little bit so I can see my complete graph. You'll see that I have that LoggerPro has actually labeled my axes for me. So you can see here my y-axis is the force of friction and my x-axis is the normal force. And I see some points on here, but those points are only for my first set of data. I can kind of see that the red color here corresponds to my force of friction for my tabletop. But I don't see another line for my ridged plastic. So what you do is you come over here and you touch on this y-axis, and if I double click on it, I'm going to see an axes options right here and for my x-axis. And what I want to do here is come down here and use that drop down menu, and I want to choose my y-axis, which actually is going to be this one. It's a little hard to tell because they're both different kinds of forces. But it's the second one that would be my y-axis there. And I'm going to say OK. And when I do that, you'll see that now a new set of data, and they have different styles, has shown up on my graph right there. Now they're both kind of a red color, but I can change that. So what I'm going to do is come back over here to my data table, and I'm going to scoot over here to my force of friction for my tabletop, and I'm going to double click on that. And one of the things you'll see here, it says the column definition, which is correct, it's the force of friction, but the options here, now I can change a couple of things. I can change the color. I'm going to go ahead and change it to blue. That seems like it would be quite different from my other line there. And I can choose various symbols. So my other one is squares. I think I'm going to choose filled triangles for my other. And there are some other things that you can change here as well, but those are the ones that I want to change. And so now I see I have my two sets of data on my graph. My graph does not yet have a title. I'm going to double click on the graph. And when I double click on the graph, I'm going to come up with some both axes options as well as some graph options. So if I click on graph options, I can put my title here. So the effect of normal force on the force of friction. That will give me a good title. And if I wanted to, I could add a legend to my graph. So if I choose that right there, I will see a legend show up, and you can see there it is, which I can move around here, which is kind of nice. Both the colors are going to show up, and it knows that this is the tabletop and this one is the ridged plastic. Even if I double click on that legend box there, if my typing there is a little small, I can increase, for example, the font size so I can make my legend a little bigger. The final thing I want to do with my graph is I want to add some lines on it. And the data looks pretty linear, so I'm going to use this tool right here. If you go up towards the top of your toolbar here, you'll see that if I choose that tool, it gives me the option to do what's called a linear fit for each of my lines. I'm going to choose both of those. I'd like linear fit on each one, and I'm going to say OK. And what that does is give me a box for each of those lines. If I move them around a little bit, it's a little clearer. And some important things for us is it has nicely calculated the slope for us, as well as some other information, which isn't particularly important for us. When you're a little bit older, some of that's going to make more sense. So we can get at both the slope for both of our lines from that. And that looks pretty good. And now we'd be ready to print our graph. In order to do that, you'll want to come up here under File, and you'll want to do a page setup. To get your graph nice and big, do a landscape, and then come back and choose you can choose a couple of things. If you just choose print, you're going to print your data table as well as your graph. You can print your graph and it will just print the graph. Or if you just wanted your data table, you could do that as well. And that will, when you print your graph, right here, you can put in a footer here. So for example, I'm going to say Bay 2-line graph. And then when you and other students are printing to the same printer, you'll know which graph is yours. And then it will come off and you'll be able to print your graph, which I'm not going to do right now because I'm not at school. And that's how to place 2 lines on one graph. And it's always a wise idea to save your work. So the last thing I'm going to do here, probably should have done it as my first thing, is I'm going to save, do a save as, and I'm going to say graph friction. And then I have it saved. If I didn't quite finish, I can always come back and work on it again. Hope that was helpful.